I'm Darren Cox. We're here at the beautiful Jubilee Pools run by Leamington Spar Angling. Fantastic place and a great place to come and show you something special. What I'm planning to do today is to give you two examples of how to use two completely different mixes with two completely different methods. Basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up on the pole to fish about 13 metres, and then I'm going to be fishing a feeder line. And to do that I will need two mixes. So first of all, as soon as I get to my peg, the first thing I always do, if I haven't done it at home, is mix my ground bait up. It's really important to get the water into that ground bait quickly so that it absorbs it and you can put the amount of water that you need perfectly into your mix. Give yourself that time. If you're in a match, you need to do it straight away when you get to the peg, or if you're actually just coming pleasure fishing, give yourself plenty of time to do it. So what I do first of all, I'm going to mix up the Proactive and show you exactly how this works. This is a great ground bait from Mainline, and it's called Proactive for the main reason is it's extremely active. So it takes a lot of water, and that's really important. So what I like to do with it, especially if I'm targeting bream and roach, I like to put a little bit of the sticky syrup molasses in it. Just gives it that nice little extra sweetness. It's probably just in my mind, but it catches me so many fish. What I do is drop the molasses into some water, mix it up just with a small amount of water, and I can add that then to my ground bait. Then I can add more water. So what I will do is I'll add a little bit of the water with the molasses, mix it all up, try and give it a real thorough, really good mixing. You can do it with a drill, or you can do it like I am today, by hand. Basically just make sure you get all that water into the ground bait. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to leave it alone for a while. Once you think you've got the right amount of mix in it, the right amount of water, it'll go down, then it'll start to dry out. And when it dries out, that's as the moisture is being taken in by the ground bait, and that's what helps all those little tiny particles of the hemp and the rapeseed oils and all the little bits and pieces to activate, so they all keep bubbling up in your peg at the right time, and that's the way ground bait works well. This stuff's perfect for a pole mix, absolutely love it. Now the second mix is a sweet marine. I've caught so many fish on this on the feeder. I catch on the pole as well, but today what I'm doing is I'm targeting roach and skimmers, so I don't want to put that fish meal base in. Sweet marine has got a lot of fish meal in it, but again, I still like to put a little bit of molasses in it. Gives you that sweetness edge again, and it never ever does any harm for bream and skimmers especially. Again, what I like to do is add a bit of water to it, mix it up thoroughly, let it take the water in, leave it alone, and then you'll have to go back to it and you probably have to add a little bit of water. But especially with feeder fishing, always on the side of dryness, because as you start to add your particles in, you're adding wetness to your ground bait. If you overwet it, it's not going to work in the feeder properly, and that's the last thing you want. Okay, so everything's good to go. I've plumbed up on the pole, I've found my distance on the feeder line, and everything's ready. All my gear's here, everything's set out exactly how I want it to be. The next thing I've got to do is get my ground bait ready to feed. So I'm feeding two lines. I'm feeding on the pole and I'm feeding at distance with the feeder. So first of all, let's look at the Proactive mix that I've mixed up to fish on the pole line. I've mixed it quite wet, which is really important on this bit, because I want to throw it in. I want to create some noise and want to spread the ground bait about. So what I'm going to do is actually make up 8 balls, which I'll show you now. I'll just make up very loosely 8 balls. That gives me the measurement I need to throw in. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that wasn't a bad guess at all, 8, and a little bit left. So there's my mix. I'm going to throw all that in, but what I need to do is make sure I've got plenty of particles in it. So I'm going to measure my particles out. The key particles are going to ground bait here. I'm fishing for roach, I'm fishing for skimmers, and maybe some perch on the pole. Now in the past, what I've done is I've put quite a lot of chopped worm in, and I've found that initially it drags a lot of perch in the peg. The skimmers and roach love the worms, but you've almost got to leave the worms out at the start to try and keep the perch away. So for me, one of the most important things is casters. Casters will go in with the feed, they'll go on the bottom, and I'm going to be loose feeding casters over the top. So I'm going to put quite a lot of casters in there. There's half a pint of casters there. And then on top of that, I'm going to put some dead red maggots. Again, there's a pint of bait there, and just for a little bit of good measure, a few pinkies and a few live maggots. The live maggots will just give me that little bit of activity in the water. So if the initial boiling in doesn't attract the fish, there's still some live bait on the bottom wriggling about. And then I'll be loose feeding over the top. So put that in the mix and then literally mix it all around. And you can see as soon as you start putting it in your mix there, it doesn't look like there's a lot of bait there. But what I've got is I've got quite a lot of volume of ground bait, which is carrying around a pint of bait. Now a pint of bait is not a lot at all. I'm probably going to leave this pole line for at least an hour, because I want to feed my feeder line, and I want to try and build my feeder line and see if there's any big fish there at the start. If there's no big fish on the feeder line, I'll come straight in onto the pole and fish that. So that's 2 lines prepped. That's my ground bait mix for the pole. We're going to boil it in a minute. I'll just show you the feeder mix now and how we're going to do that. My next mix is my feeder mix. This is a sweet marine. Basically it's pure sweet marine with just a little bit of sweet molasses in it. Just something to give it that little bit more sweetness. Bream love a bit of molasses, and I can't resist putting it in, even though it's largely fish meal. And as I say, in good old Blue Peter fashion, here's one I've prepared earlier. Basically what I've done is I've done the same as I did with the pole mix. I've added in lots of particles, mainly dead red maggots and casters again. But the slight difference here is I'm just going to add literally 2 handfuls of the activated micro pellets, the 2 mils activated coarse pellets. And that just all that does is, if there's any fish, small fish on my feeder line, there's always going to be a few pellets there that those fish, they'll eat them, but it'll be the last thing they eat. So it's just a good way of making sure you've always got a little bit of bait in there. Once I start fishing, I can start introducing more and more particles, and as I fish, hopefully I'll start to see a pattern of what the fish want, and that's what I'll start adding more and more of into the feeder. And one of the other things is I'll start to add a lot more chopped worm in. If I'm catching bream and skimmers, that could be what I need to actually feed. I'm going to start off with a bait up feeder, a guru bait up feeder, get loads and loads of bait in those. I'll probably end up putting about 10 of those in with that amount of bait. Doesn't take long, but the beauty about them is they basically empty very quickly. My mix is quite dry, you can see, but what I'll do is I'll squeeze it in, it'll hit the water, it'll go down, and it'll start to absorb water very quickly. By the time that feeder hits the bottom, that sweet marine will be exploding out the feeder, and I can retrieve very quickly. It's a really good way of feeding quickly, getting a lot of bait in and accurately in one spot. So let's get on with it and let's try and catch some fish. Feed and then fish. I've started on the pole line. I actually put 8 balls in, and I threw them in, and what's important often is it's a real high impact feeding way. When you throw balls in, a lot of noise, and you get quite a lot of cloud comes off the feed when you do that. So I thought it was very important to just start on the pole and see what was there. And to be honest, it's been fantastic. The fish have reacted terrifically to the feed. One of the things on fisheries like this is gets a lot of carp anglers here. So the fish are used to sort of impact feeding, a lot of spotting goes on. So they come to noise, and that's the main reason I did it. I just thought it'd be a good way of drawing fish quickly into an area and catching very quickly. On the feeder line, I've put plenty of bait out on my feeder line, so I'm more than happy. I put particles in with corn and micros. More than happy to have enough bait out there to hold any fish that come on that line for an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. Bream and skimmers especially, they'll just sit over a bit of bait and pick it off. Whereas with balling it in close, you get a lot of fish coming to your peg. Sometimes some good fish, and you know, I've had some decent skimmers really quickly and quite a lot of roach, and it's really worked. But what I am doing is I'm feeding over the top of that as well, which is really important to keep that amount of particle bait in the water. The rig's very simple. It's just like a standard DC15, one of my own floats. It's a little float, 0.6, fishing about 7.5, 8 foot of water, but conditions are perfect. No need to go any heavier. It's a simple bulk. There you go, another fish. It's lovely fishing. Just a simple bulk of an olivet and 3 droppers. The olivet itself is about 20 inches from the hook, so it's quite what we class as a tight shotting pattern, and then the 3 shots below it. I want it to be positive. I want to get the bait down quickly. I know there's a lot of bait on the bottom, and I want to get that bait down very, very quickly to the bottom and be fishing as quick as I can. I'm fishing now. I'm loading my catapult. I'm going to feed some casters out. There you go, fish straight away. I've just managed to reload my catapult for next time, just in time. So it's a bit of a time and motion exercise. It's about getting stuff right and being ready all the time. The more you can utilise your time whilst fishing and catching fish, the more effective you can be. But this is a great little session. I'm really enjoying myself. Good fishing. Hopefully in an hour or so, then I can get onto the feeder and catch some fish on there as well. But this ground bait certainly worked. I can see it fizzing and pinging. You know, there's a lot of activity. It tells me there's fish are actually in the ground bait and working it. They're moving it about, and it's, you know, the little flecks of bait. Oh, small fish that. Little bits of bait flicking off and pinging up off the bottom. That just keeps it active. You're not feeding masses and masses of bait, but you're keeping a very active mix close to the bottom, and odd bits flicking up and rising up. And it's a great way to feed and especially catch skimmers and roach. One of the questions I get asked a lot when you're fishing, you know, 2 or even 3 different methods, especially when you've fed a feed line and you're wanting to go on that feeder line, despite the fact that you're actually catching fish, when do you switch? And it's a big question, and it's very, very difficult to answer. But one of the things I will always say to people is never come off feeding fish. If you're catching fish, then keep catching fish. It's really, really important. But in a match, you've got people around you, and you can actually use those people around you really, really effectively. So if you're the one that's catching the most fish on the pole, and people around you aren't catching those fish on the pole, and they go onto the feeder or they switch to the feeder, then they're a great barometer. Keep your eye on them, be nosy, ask them questions, ask them what they're catching, ask them what weight they've got, and always keep account yourself of what weight you think you've got. You know, I've not been fishing that long, but I reckon I've got 7 or 8 pound already, which is great fishing. So that to me is a couple of bream. So if you speak to the guy next to you and ask him what he's got, or you can see somebody over the far side of the lake who's caught a couple of bream, it's giving you a good idea of when to switch. And the most important thing is, if you have to come off a pole line like this, then you've got to look after it. You've got to refeed it, put an extra ball in and keep loose feeding casters over the top. Really, really important to keep those plates spinning and keep those fish feeding, because you could go in on the feeder, catch 2 or 3 skimmers or bream, and then they back off. They might just want to rest. So that when you've got that pole line there, it's absolutely perfect. I always say if you can catch off 2 lines effectively, you've got a really, really good chance of winning matches. So the pole line is lovely now, it's nice and steady away. I'm getting fish most casts, a few roach on the drop, and when I can get on the bottom, I catch skimmers. It's just a matter of just trying to find patterns when you're fishing the pole. Find a pattern and then you get into a routine. So bringing the fish back, rebaiting, shipping out, remembering where you last caught that fish. You know, at the moment what I'm doing is I'm actually just flicking my rig past where my main feed line is, because I can seem to get a bite quicker doing that. I think it's probably because there's still a lot of bait on the bottom out there, and there's plenty of fish, but if I just fish a little bit off my feed, I seem to get a quicker bite. And in an ideal situation, I want that float to settle, because I want to catch skimmers, and there's certainly plenty of skimmers out there, but the roach are obviously there as well. There you go, that's a fish. That's settled. I thought that was going to be a skimmer then, but probably a little skimmer. That's just no, it's a roach, but it's a nice roach. I'll say it's just all about getting into a nice smooth rhythm. What you can't do when you're fishing the pole is rush your fish. Yes, you want to be in and out quickly to get back out there and fish, but sometimes it's just a little bit better just to not slow down, but just take your time and get things right. Avoid getting tangles, putting your rig in the right place, lowering it down. When you get a bite, you know, let the bite develop. A lot of the time, especially with skimmers, see, I did exactly what I shouldn't have done then. Struck too early because I had a bite on the drop, and then that's a roach. But what I'm doing is I'm feeding over the top. I'm not going mad with feed, because I don't really want the fish to come up. It's quite sunny, and the fish will come up if I keep lashing lots of bait at them. But there's plenty of bait out there from the initial feed, and all I'm doing with those casters I'm putting in, I'm just keeping it topped up. That's all you want to do. Get into that rhythm, get into that routine, find the right hook bait that is the most effective, A, to get a bite, and B, to actually hook the fish, because sometimes you can get bites on caster and you miss a lot of them. I'm feeding casters, but double red maggot, live or dead, seems to be good at the moment, and it's catching me pretty much everything. But straight away, that was on the drop, be another roach, but it's just nice and steady away. And then what happens is you'll get a little skimmer, that one, you'll get a run of skimmers coming the peg, and they'll push the roach out, and you'll catch 5 or 6 decent skimmers, and it just helps you build that big overall weight towards the end. I think a lot of the time people also get confused with which ground bait to use. There's such a big choice these days, and I mean, I try and keep my selection very, very simple. I look at what I want the ground bait to do for me. Take, for example, Sweet Marine. It does everything I need it to do on a feeder. The main reason is it's a fairly inert ground bait. When I say inert, I mean when you've mixed it with water, it doesn't fizz and bubble and everything. There's a little bit of oil comes off it, but most of the ground bait stays on the bottom. I can mix it how I want to. If I want to mix it dry or wet, it still works perfectly. And it's all about understanding the mix and how it works. The worst thing you can do, in my book, with ground bait is keep chopping and changing. Get a ground bait that works, and Sweet Marine, trust me, it really, really does work. And stick with it. Once you stick with it, you start to learn and understand how it performs and how you mix it, how's the best way to mix it. And the same with Proactive. Proactive doesn't have the fish meal content, but I don't want any fish meal in this. You know, on a lake like this, I could potentially be catching 10 or 15 pound of roach in amongst skimmers and other fish. Now, if I put a lot of fish meal in, I could actually deter those roach from coming onto that feed line. And I don't want that. What I can do is I can be selective with my hook baits. For example, I could drop a piece of corn on today and be selective and not necessarily catch roach with it. Fish a bigger hook bait underneath a natural ground bait. And it's just a way, you just got to think and try and understand how the ground bait's working. You know, it's an hour or so since that ground bait went out, and I can still see it pinging and fizzing on the surface. It's totally different to what the Sweet Marine does. And that ground bait's working for me all the time in the swim. And all I'm doing, I'm complementing that ground bait by loose feeding and keeping the particle content strong enough where the ground bait is on the bottom, and the fish will just sit over it and sit nicely and comfortably all day if I keep feeding them. Well, we've had a lovely couple of hours on a pole. I don't really want to come off it, to be honest, because it's been so enjoyable. Catching nice quality roach like that, skimmers and a couple of, you know, bigger skimmers. But it's time I had a look on the feeder. I treat these like practice sessions, and it's a really good thing to do. I've caught a lot of fish, and it's good to see if there's any fish come over that other feeder line. Let's have a go. So I always start off on a feeder with you know, something I know will get me a bite. Double maggot is often good, dead maggot or 2 live maggots, something like that, just to give me a good start. So I've marked up where my feed's gone, and that is absolutely bang on the money. Sink the line. I'm using braid to a shock leader today. It's just a really good way of seeing what's going on. Braid, you know, you start to see liners, and so you can see anything really that's going on. So one of the most important things to do is keep feeding that pole line, because you never know, I could need it in a match, could need it. Could be the last hour and the fish go a bit iffy, I need to catch 2 or 3 pound of extra roach, just to keep topping up and just to keep fishing the net. I just had a little dink there straight away, first chuck on that. But, hopefully it'll turn round to be a big pull round and catch a nice bream or a skimmer. So this place is full of bream and skimmers. It's really, really prolific for them. And you catch them on ground bait and or method as well. So never be afraid when you've fed somewhere like that. You know, if you're starting to get a few big fish, it can be really good just putting a method on as well and fishing with the big, you know, like a boilie or three maggots on a hook. It's a good way again of sorting the bigger fish out. And sometimes when you're on a fishery that's got a lot of fish in it, it's about sorting the better fish out. So I had a sign then. I'm just going to have another quick chuck, because what you tend to find when you start is it's often better to have 2 really quick chucks and then slow it down, because that little extra burst of feed in 2 chucks helps potentially bring the fish back in if they've just moved away from the bait a little bit. So Again, nicely on the feed area that. Let the bait settle. Sink the line or sink the braid and be patient. So I just give this, oh, there you go, that's a great start. Do you know, when I was casting out, I actually felt as if I actually hit a fish on the way down there. So this is a skimmer by the feel of it. Good start. Just shows you there's fish on my feed. They were just settled over it. Oh, it's a little skimmer, foul hooked him. Do you know what? I think that was the one I felt on the way down. It obviously followed the feeder down, that skimmer, and just foul hooked him on the top of the head. So that's an indication that they are potentially coming to the noise and following the feed down. And if that's the case, if they're tight coming down and following the feeder down, sometimes you need to tighten up your rig. I'm fishing a hook length about 3 foot at the moment, and it might be a little bit too long for today because there's certainly a lot of fish feeding. But we'll see. We'll see. The secret is to just start to feel your way in. But the good news is we've had a fish. Good start. One of the things that traditional bream and feeder anglers have always done is fish quite a slow match, a slow feeder, and just recently, the last few years, we've learned how important it is to keep recasting, keep bait going in. If you were fishing on the pole, for example, you'd be catapulting feed in all the time, you'd be throwing ground bait in, or you'd be potting bait in all the time. Now, when you're feeder fishing, unless you're casting, after your initial feed, there's no feed going in. So if you've cast out and your feed has been in for 10 minutes, there's only that amount of bait around your feeder. And bearing in mind, a lot of fish are attracted to noise, and they're attracted, oh, there's another fish, only a small fish, but another bite. It's good. Fish are attracted to noise, fish are attracted to cloud, and they're attracted to all kinds of things. And if they get used to the feeder going in all the time, if they know that every time they hear that feeder going in, or they see that cloud coming off the feeder, they will stay around, they will hang around, and every time it goes in, they will come to that feeder. And that is really, really important to remember. Oh, lost that one off of the net. Little skimmer, no bigger fish out there at the moment, so it'll be interesting to see what's happening. It's often really important to alternate hook baits. One of the main reasons is if you're catching small fish, then there's a reason for it, because either there's no big fish in your peg, or the small fish are getting to the bait before the big fish. This is a classic example. I've been fishing 2 and 3 dead red maggots on the feeder, and I've been getting bites, I've been catching skimmers and everything, but I've just changed to a dendrobina topped and tailed, and the stamp of fish is much better. Now, that worm avoided the small fish, and that definitely caught me the bigger fish. Now it's not necessarily the case that I'll put another one on and just carry on catching big fish. It might be that there was just one big fish in the peg and it's summer baiting time, but if you don't chop and change and keep trying to make things happen, then you're more in the lap of the gods. You're more in the situation where you're relying on the fish to find what you've got on the hook, rather than you trying to change baits and find the right bait for the fish on the day. And it always varies. You know, you can say, oh, worms are fantastic for bream, you always catch breams, but some days you can only catch them on maggot. And often it is dependent on whether there's small fish in the peg or perch or whatever. You know, sometimes perch can be a real nuisance with worm. So you're better off avoiding putting worms in or on and fishing baits like dead red maggots and corn, things like that. But it's all about ringing those changes and trying to make it happen. It's the only way you can do it to get that consistency in your peg. The mix I'm using obviously is a sweet marine base, but as I've been fishing and feeding, I've felt like I've needed to make the mix a lot richer and a lot more appealing to big fish. I've caught quite a few fish on the feeder, but they're the same, a lot of them are the same size as the fish I was catching on the pole, so there's not really any advantage to me fishing the feeder unless I can catch some bigger fish. So what I've started to do, I'm using a slightly bigger cage, 4-square cage, and I'm packing it with the sweet marine, but what I've done is I've added quite a lot of 2mm activated pellets, quite a bit of chopped worm now, and lots of corn. So I'm trying to appeal to bigger fish. I want those fish to come onto my feed, and I'm getting a response because I've just had 2 or 3 better fish. I'd one on worm and a couple on dead red maggots. But it's just about, oh, there you go, straight away. What is noticeable is if I get a decent fish, it tends to be as the feeder's falling through the water and the feeder hits the bottom and my hook bait is still off the bottom, and these fish today, because we've had a fairly cold night and a very, very bright, warm, sunny day, I think these fish have come off the bottom a little bit. And to say, I'm still using a fairly long hook length, and that feeder's going down, the fish are chasing it, and because I've got a long hook length on, they're actually spotting my hook bait, which is travelling a lot slower than the feeder. As the feeder hits the bottom, the hook bait travels at a much more natural rate. So that's something to be really mindful of. You know, it's going back to what I've said before in feeder fishing. It's about fast fishing. It's about using big baits that are visible and keep casting, not be sat there expecting the fish to come to you. In fishing, the best anglers make it happen, and it's all about making it happen. Whether you're fishing for carp, roach, bream, anything, it's so important to keep ringing the changes, keep trying to understand what's going on within your peg and making it happen. Oh, get out of the way, Grebe. Well, the sun's starting to drop behind the trees now. There's a bit of a nip in the air, you can tell winter's on its way. It's that time of year. I've had a fantastic day's fishing today. I started on the pole. I've caught loads and loads of fish on the pole. I've gone out on the feeder and I've caught a few fish on the feeder, and it's been quite good. But the fish haven't been any bigger on the feeder than they have on the pole. So now I've come back on the pole. If I was in a match today, I'll be thinking to myself, I'm going to get a bigger weight today on the pole. So thankfully what I've done is, you know, I've nurtured both lines, I've kept both lines going, so I still have that option even at the end of the day to catch some fish. like I said earlier, it's all about priming those lines. It's about getting the right ground bait for the right situation, a feeder mix for your feeder fishing and a nice, sweet, active mix for your pole fishing. Both these ground baits have worked absolutely perfectly for me today and caught me a lot of fish. It's been a fantastic day and a good learning day, and it's days like this where you just pick up those tiny little tips. I hope today that this has been some good advice and some little tips that you can have, something that you can learn about and apply to your own fishing. It's about time for me to wrap it up, and that's a good end there on a fish. So next time you're at your local natural lake or on a commercial that's got lots of mixed fishing, don't forget the natural baits as well as the fish meal baits, because they've both got a terrific place in this kind of circumstances.